Part. Let's go through some of these stories in a bit more detail. Alex Petropoulos, political commentator with Young Voices UK, is here. Alex, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie.
Would you like a right to switch off?
I do. I work in Belgium, so I actually do have a right to switch off. But I think that what's more important than the right is just the norms. It's most important that you actually just create that culture and you have that conversation, you put it in writing with your boss, with your employer, whoever, saying, look, this is what the expectations are. Because what most people want is they just want to know what they're getting into, what they're signing up for when they get a job. They want to know, is this a job? Am I going to be in a bit more of a scrappy startup environment? Will I be expected, to sort of be leaned on outside of working hours, to have to put in a bit of extra work? And maybe I'm okay with signing up for that. Or am I looking for something that is very 9 to 5? Am I looking for something really regimented? And I'd like to make it really clear that that's something that I want from the get-go.
So how does it work where you are?
So at my company specifically, we have these little documents we make when you join the company. It's called a working with me document. And you sort of say this, these are the hours I like to work. This is how you can contact me. This is how you can contact me inside working hours. This is how you can contact me, if at all, outside working hours. And you sort of lay down publicly, everyone in the company lays down publicly, this is how you like to work. And this is the best way that you can get out of me, an individual.
And then do you find that your employer honours that?
Yes, I do, because I think that they understand that it's the best way of getting the best out of me, right? It's the best way of getting my best work is by having me work in the ways that bring the best, yeah. and also me respecting others and sort of understanding this is how I can work the best with someone else.
And what's the culture like? Does it foster a sense where everyone says, okay, we're going to put in really healthy boundaries? Or is there any sense of competitiveness that says, well, I'm going to get ahead if I say you can contact me any time?
I think that it's quite healthy, but I think also it creates a system where people are okay to sort of say, because I've laid it down very clearly, this means that, if we are having a project that we really need to get done over the weekend, by next Monday, we're going to be okay maybe working a bit later or really putting in one little push just to get things across the board if we really believe and stand by the company and stand by the project. Mm-hmm. Because we know that we have the guarantee that that's not a hard requirement, it's not an expectation, it's a necessity. There's almost, by having things set in stone more, by having things nicer by default, there's actually more willingness, I feel, for people to step up and go above and beyond.
Okay, it's really interesting to see how it works in practice. I mean, when I lived in France, it was sort of basically ignored. I mean, if you work in news, I guess the understanding, and maybe you'd write this in your document that you have with your boss, I mean, you wouldn't want to not be contacted because there was a big story and then you missed it because it was outside of your working hours. So the kind of expectation is if something's happening, you want to know about it and you want to be there. This story on the front page of the Times, and there's much more detail inside. There's a quote here from this woman who said, bailiffs came calling over a clean air zone. I didn't even know it existed. This is a lady called Paula who was woken up with the bailiffs knocking on the door. She lives in Plymouth and she'd got a fine of £508 that she'd incurred by driving through the city's clean air zone. She did that the year before, didn't even realise that the clean air zone existed. I mean, what's the problem here? It's not the clean air zones, presumably. It's a lack of information and knowledge that suddenly you're racking up a big bill.
Yeah, so the root cause of it seems to be, signage, seems to be information. When you drive through London, you get all those pop-ups on your Google Maps saying, oh, you're going to go through this zone, oh, you're going to have to pay a bit more. And this case in particular was unfortunate because the individual had some bereavement issues, had all sorts of things happening, which meant that they couldn't actually pay the bill and it sort of racked up and exploded. And that feels like a separate issue to look at in and of itself. But I think that we do have to be a bit careful when talking about these things because we definitely don't want to scrap and bin the whole system just because of some edge cases, just because of the few people that it happens to hurt a bit too excessively at the bottom. Because I think this is the thing that happens a lot in UK politics is that we get very caught up in looking at extreme cases both at the top end of the spectrum and the bottom of the spectrum. And in the pursuit of fairness, we end up with a system that overall is worse for everyone. And so, yes, it'd be better if local governments did a better job at sort of informing people and having better signage. And you know, how do we change the incentive system so that, you know, there isn't this incentive for people often feel that local governments almost want to catch them in the act when it comes to fines, when it comes to these sort of things.
Well, it's intensely frustrating if you get a letter about something and you realise you went into a bus lane that you didn't feel was, you know, signposted effectively. What another dynamic of this story that's on the front page of the Times is bailiffs say motorists are increasingly selfish as they feel free to ignore the law and attribute this to some fraying of the social fabric that led to the recent riots across the country. There seems to be a little bit of a gear change, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago actually on Times Radio, and that people feel like, oh, you know, you can fine me, I don't care, I'm not going to pay it. I feel sort of above this legislation.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of that. You know, when it comes to people following the law, I think my opinion is, and I think there's some research to back this up, which is that the number one thing that matters is whether or not you think you're going to get caught. It doesn't actually matter how big the fine is. It doesn't actually matter what the actual crime itself is. It matters, do you think there's a reasonable chance that you're going to get caught for doing what you do? And when it comes to these specific incidents, when it comes to traffic incidents, we have very proven technological ways of catching people. We have the cameras, we have the license plates. We're not allowed to automatically ring up people's license plates and send them fines and whatnot, but we have the technology to do it. And so I'd be a lot actually happier moving to a system where we lower the fines. We say, look, these fines are a bit excessive, but every single person who does this is going to be sent one. And every single person who sent this is going to pay for it because it is a low-paying fine. And maybe if you actually change the system to one where people get these fines every single time, they know what's happening, there's this feedback system in place so that it's not this sort of maybe I get caught and then slapped with something massive. It's every time I get caught and get pushed, get nudged in the correct direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think people are pretty furious if you didn't realise something was up, and then the bailiffs turn up. This lady had to pay £500. As you said, there's sort of more unique circumstances there. Let's look inside the paper, and Libby Purvis has written a column which I think will chime with people. Why Sweet 16, she's titled it, quickly sours in rural Britain. She says, for a minority who are not academic or have apprenticeships, their world may narrow just as it should be broadening. We're talking a lot about the future of our teenagers right now because, of course, we had A-level results last week. What did you think of the argument that she puts forward?
I think it was a really interesting one. She essentially lays the case that when you enter this period between 16 and 18, there's this gap where you lose out to essentially benefits that allow you to sort of fund your transport to and from your education, your apprenticeship, whatever you might be doing. And this might be contributing to sort of you falling in between the cracks and becoming a NEET, not an employment or educational training. And I think there are definitely issues like that's an obvious flaw in the system, right? We obviously need to fix that. But I think it also sort of prompts a larger story about, you know, someone says, okay, why don't you just move? Why wouldn't you just move away from the rural countryside where you don't have good bus connections, where you don't have good local infrastructure? And for a lot of people, that's just not an option because, you know, housing's too expensive or there just aren't cheap enough places to move. So yes, there's this direct problem. But when I look at this, I also want to look at the systemic issue and saying, okay, what is the underlying cause that's actually aggravating this? And it's, you know, underinvestment in local services. And to be honest, that's because all of the money goes to Westminster. We don't have enough devolved spending. We don't have enough money that gets distributed out to local regions that they can then invest in their local infrastructure. It's also because, you know, we've got a planning system that's not working. We're not building houses in the density and the style that's necessary to allow people to move into cities. You know, if they lived in that rural countryside, they wanted to say, okay, turn 16, let's move somewhere denser so that you can not have to commute an hour and a half to go to your sixth form college. That's not on the table for so many parents across the country. And I think that is the emblematic policy failure that really needs to be solved.
Yeah. I think we should end on a lighter note. There are some kind of slightly crazy stories in the paper we haven't had time to look at, so just a quick whistle-stop tour. Your parcel courier is now a more familiar face than your postie, which is a bit sad. The number of people leaving money to their pets in their will, which is just extraordinary. Do you remember when Karl Lagerfeld, of Chanel, of course, left his cat Choupette over £1 million? I actually was working at a daytime TV show at the time, and the request was to get Choupette on the show before this had happened. And apparently Choupette was very busy, so Choupette wasn't available. But the thing we should finish on, Alex, is definitely at the Fringe, the best joke at the Fringe. I'm going to get you to deliver it, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. I'll deliver it, yeah, with pleasure. So this is by Mark Simmons, and he won the prize for his one-liner. I was going to sail around the globe in the world's smallest ship, but I bottled it.
You did a much better job than I would have done, Alex. It's always a fun part of the Fringe, isn't it? Taking a look at the best bits. I'm always slightly disappointed because I think puns are often lost on me. What about you?
I am a big fan of puns. I am also a massive fan of dad jokes. I turned 24 this weekend, and I think I'm already in the dad joke territory. I've embraced them wholeheartedly, and I think that they're just one of the most beautiful forms of comedy and literature around.
Okay, well, you can enjoy reading inside the paper this morning highlights from the final shortlist of jokes, and the ship gag is one of many that I think, if you are like Alex, will make you chuckle this morning, or groan if you're more like me. Alex, thank you very much going through the papers with me this morning.
It's been a pleasure.